Welcome to the Iran 1400 Project podcast, where we explore the past, present, and possible futures of Iran through informed dialogue, independent thought, and diverse voices. From historical insight to emerging narratives, we connect ideas to action in the pursuit of a more just, inclusive, and forward-looking society. Join us as we rethink Iran's trajectory, one conversation at a time.
We have a profoundly important deep dive for you today.
We really do.
Yeah, if you have ever looked at a country caught in just absolute turmoil, watch the headlines flash across your screen and wondered what actually happens the day after a crisis?
Right, morning after.
Exactly. Well, you are in the right place today. Today is March 5, 2026, and a really comprehensive new article was just published today that attempts to answer exactly that question.
It's a heavy one, but so necessary.
It is. It's titled Civic Society and Iran's Unfinished Future, and it's written by Vafa Mostaqim. He's the executive director of the Iran 1400 Project. And the mission of our deep dive today is to really look at the mechanics of societal change.
Getting under the hood.
Yeah, we are going to explore a vital distinction here. The difference between merely swapping out political leaders at the very top and the much deeper, much slower work of rebuilding a nation's civic foundations completely from the ground up. So, okay, let's unpack this.
And look, before we dive into the mechanics of this, I think we need to acknowledge the gravity of the landscape we're discussing here.
Absolutely.
We are dealing with incredibly charged events. The situation in Iran right now involves severe state repression, massive protests, regional conflicts.
And a devastating human toll.
A truly devastating human toll.
Yeah.
So our goal today isn't to litigate which political faction should win out or, to endorse any specific side.
Right.
Instead, we are stepping back. We want to act as your guides through this historical analysis, examining how a society actually attempts to rebuild its foundation in the aftermath of immense trauma.
That is a crucial baseline for us to operate from, because to understand the future, you have to contextualize the present crisis.
You do.
The current state of Iran is just one of profound uncertainty. We're looking at a convergence of intensifying geopolitical tensions, escalating internal repression, and just severe economic strain.
It's a perfect storm.
It really is one of the most volatile periods in the country's contemporary history. But beyond the geopolitics, there's this staggering human cost. Thousands of demonstrators have been killed.
Yeah.
Countless more have been imprisoned or displaced. You have families mourning and entire communities carrying incredibly deep, unresolved grievances.
And that trauma doesn't just vanish when the news cycle moves on.
No, not at all.
It leaves a lasting scar on the national psyche. And what happens is it produces these fiercely competing narratives about what the nation's destiny should actually be.
It creates a vacuum.
Exactly, a vacuum. And into that vacuum rushes this massive debate. Across the Iranian diaspora and within the intellectual circles watching all this unfold, the conversation about what political arrangements might follow this crisis is intense.
I mean, people are desperately looking for a blueprint.
They are. And you essentially have two main contrasting viewpoints dominating the discourse right now. On one side, you have advocates for the restoration of earlier political models.
The idea being stability.
Right. Yeah, right. The argument there is that returning to a previous known system provides a necessary anchor. It offers national continuity and immediate stability.
But then you have a completely different approach on the other side of the debate.
A very different approach.
You have people pushing for pluralistic coalitions and highly decentralized political arrangements. And I think it's important, when we talk about pluralism in the context of Iran, we aren't just talking about a couple of different political parties trying to get along in a parliament.
No, it's much deeper than that.
We are talking about attempting to bridge vast ethnic, linguistic, and geographic divides. Because Iran is incredibly diverse. You have Kurds, Balochs, Azeris, Lurs, Arabs, and so many others.
A massive mosaic.
Yeah, and the advocates for decentralization argue that a modern political structure has to actively reflect that immense social reality, rather than just steamrolling over it.
Both of these debates reflect genuine, deeply held aspirations for the future of the country. But there's a hidden trap here.
What's the trap?
The risk is that these debates narrow the entire conversation into a simple zero-sum contest over political power. The focus becomes entirely about who gets to sit in the central chair in Tehran. But the much deeper existential question is about the condition of Iran's civic foundations.
The invisible stuff holding it together.
Exactly. Can the society actually rebuild basic trust among its citizens? Can it cultivate inclusive institutions that outlast any single leader?
Which brings us to a really intense dynamic taking place right now within the diaspora regarding leadership itself.
This is a huge point of contention.
Massive. There is this huge discussion over whether the opposition movement needs to find a recognizable national figure to guide the country through a transitional period, like a single symbolic leader who can just hold things together until a national referendum can take place.
Right.
But conversely, there is a very vocal caution against concentrating authority in one person, favoring a coalition-based leadership to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past.
What's fascinating here is that this tension reveals a persistent dilemma in opposition politics everywhere, not just in Iran.
It's a universal problem.
It really is. Everyone expresses a philosophical concern about centralized leadership, yet alternative, decentralized structures that can actually mobilize the same level of public recognition are incredibly difficult to build.
They just don't grab the headlines the same way.
Exactly. We see this pattern in many societies experiencing prolonged political crises. It is the widening gap between charismatic visibility and institutional legitimacy.
Let's break down that gap, because it's a concept you, the listener, can probably relate to in your own life.
Oh, for sure.
Think about a failing company or maybe a struggling community organization you might have been part of. When things go wrong, the immediate instinct is often to look for a single savior.
A white knight.
Yes. People want the celebrity CEO or the charismatic new director to swoop in and fix everything overnight. And the visibility of that one person generates a ton of immediate momentum and excitement.
Everyone feels better for a minute.
Right. But relying on that savior completely ignores the hard, unglamorous work of fixing the underlying systemic trust and the toxic culture of the institution itself.
That corporate analogy is a great way to ground the concept. And we have seen the exact same dynamic play out in regional history on a national scale.
Over and over.
When people are exhausted by continuous turmoil and economic pain, the allure of a strongman figure who promises to cut through the noise and fix everything overnight is incredibly seductive.
It's an easy answer to a hard problem.
It is. Charismatic visibility is a powerful short-term force. But sustainable political transformation doesn't come from a single person's charisma. It ultimately depends on institutions that command inclusive civic trust.
And when that's missing?
When that civic trust is absent, political discourse becomes entirely personalized. It devolves into arguments over who is a hero and who is a villain, rather than discussions about the civic frameworks necessary to sustain legitimate governance over decades.
I understand the theory, but let's look at the reality on the ground. When a society is enduring the kind of severe state repression we just outlined, and people are actively grieving the loss of thousands of lives, how realistic is it to ask citizens to sit around focusing on inclusive civic trust?
This is a massive ask.
The sheer scale of human loss creates immense pressure for rapid transformation. People are outraged. And in that emotional state, stories that promise a quick fix, just replacing one governing structure with another, they're going to be far more appealing than a lecture on institutional mechanics.
That is the tragedy of the situation, and it is exactly why the pressure for a quick fix is so high. But history shows that societies emerging from prolonged repression face a much more demanding challenge than simply swapping out the executive branch.
It's never that easy.
Never. True transformation requires the reconstruction of shared norms, of basic civic trust, and of collective responsibility. Without those invisible foundations, even the most well-intentioned, rapidly implemented political projects will fracture.
They just fall apart under pressure.
They struggle to achieve durability. The challenge isn't just a political engineering problem. It is deeply civic.
And a major part of that civic challenge requires revisiting intellectual history to reclaim what is referred to in the text as a civic vocabulary.
This is a vital concept.
It requires taking a step back in time. We are talking about ideas rooted as far back as the constitutional revolution of the early 1900s.
Right.
During that period, Iranians were having massive foundational debates about what it meant to have a parliament, the rule of law, and a constitution. They were actively defining concepts like justice, freedom, independence, and citizenship.
Those concepts were the intellectual bedrock of modern Iranian political thought.
Yeah.
They were debated endlessly by thinkers trying to navigate the intersection of tradition, modernity, and governance.
But over time, those profound philosophical ideas are reduced to mere ideological slogans.
And it completely hollowed out.
They do. They become detached from the deep moral and ethical debates that originally gave them meaning.
Exactly. Instead of justice being a shared ideal that a society collectively works toward, it becomes a buzzword weaponized to attack a political opponent.
The vocabulary loses its power to unite.
And instead becomes a tool to divide and conquer.
That hollowing out is exactly what the Iran 1400 Project is trying to reverse. Their mission is to recover this intellectual continuity.
To go back to the roots.
Yes. They are actively examining the historical evolution of these ideas to see how generations of Iranian thinkers and communities grappled with massive questions of legitimacy. And the point of this reflection isn't to prescribe a specific political outcome.
They aren't handing out a blueprint.
Right. They aren't trying to say, based on our research, Iran needs this exact parliamentary structure.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the goal is to restore that broader civic vocabulary so that citizens can actually discuss their future with historical awareness.
So they have the words to talk to each other.
Exactly. Rebuilding this vocabulary isn't just an academic exercise for scholars. It is a necessary precursor to any legitimate governance.
That makes sense.
Think about it practically. If different factions within a society don't even agree on what the word justice means, how can they possibly build a functioning justice system together?
They can't. They'd just be talking past each other.
Right. The vocabulary must be reestablished before the architecture can be built.
To that end, there is a specific concept introduced by a thinker named Aram Hassami that acts as a cornerstone for this new vocabulary.
It's a beautiful concept.
It is. It's the concept of Iranian citizenry, or in Persian, Sharvand-e Iran-Zaman. The Iran 1400 Project actually produced an audiobook on this topic as a gift to the public, simply to encourage dialogue on how these ideas are evolving.
Just putting the ideas out there.
Exactly. And the term itself carries incredible weight. Iran-Zaman translates to the land of Iran, but it evokes a deep historical and cultural continuity that transcends modern political borders or any specific regime. And Sharvand means citizen.
Putting those terms together represents a profound shift in the political imagination.
Absolutely.
Well, in many prolonged conflicts, identity is rigidly defined by ideological alignment, religious affiliation, or loyalty to a specific political authority.
It's very tribal.
Very tribal. But Sharvand Iran-Zaman Iranian citizenry emphasizes a shared civic relationship among individuals who simply inhabit a common historical and cultural space.
It changes the whole premise.
It reframes the fundamental question of the nation's future, instead of asking which faction should dominate the state apparatus.
Which is just an endless zero-sum game of power.
Exactly. The framework asks a much more constructive question. What civic relationship should bind individuals together as members of a shared political community?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because an initial reaction to a broad concept like citizenry might be to assume it's an attempt to gloss over differences, like a way to make everyone uniformly Iranian at the expense of their local identities.
The flattening of the culture.
Right. But the framework explicitly avoids erasing Iran's vast ethnic and cultural diversity. In fact, it provides the very foundation where pluralism and shared civic responsibility can actually coexist.
Because it functions as a civic narrative, not a rigid political program.
That's a key distinction.
A political program demands compliance. A civic narrative invites participation. It is built on mutual recognition and ethical responsibility toward one another. Those are the actual durable foundations of legitimate governance, rather than just imposing one group's will on everyone else through force.
But let's look at how this transitions from theory to practice.
Let's do it.
It is one thing to have a beautiful intellectual concept like Sharvand Iran-Zaman, but how do you operationalize that in a society where trust has been systematically broken? How do you move from a philosophical discussion to practical reality?
That transition requires strategic analysis, and the article brings in some highly relevant research conducted through Persimedia.
That they look at.
They examine the relationship between legitimacy, narrative, and institutional resilience. The research highlights a stark contrast in how different systems survive stress.
Okay.
Political systems that rely primarily on coercive mechanisms, using force, fear, and repression, might be able to maintain surface-level stability for a period of time. But coercion is incredibly expensive to maintain, and it deeply struggles to sustain long-term public trust.
Coercive systems are inherently brittle. The moment a massive economic shock or an external crisis hits, the fear holding everything together isn't enough anymore.
Exactly. By contrast, institutions that the public perceives as legitimate expressions of their collective will demonstrate far greater resilience.
Because the people actually buy into them.
Right. Legitimate institutions can weather severe economic downturns or social crises because the public trusts the process, even if they are unhappy with the current situation.
The trust acts like a shock absorber.
Yes. The public discourse is the arena where that legitimacy is either built or destroyed. But today, citizens have to navigate an incredibly complex, rapidly evolving media environment. They are bombarded with information, competing interpretations, and aggressive narrative framing.
Which brings us to the tools needed to survive that environment. The source details how certain initiatives are stepping in to bridge the gap between complex intellectual theories and everyday public discourse.
Practical application.
Exactly. It specifically highlights a platform called Canal of Vafa, which is actively focused on building what is termed civic literacy.
Not just reading the news.
Right. This isn't just about teaching people to read the news. It is about cultivating conversations around media literacy, narrative awareness, and civic responsibility. It is teaching people how to deconstruct the media they consume, to recognize when a piece of information is designed to trigger an emotional response versus when it is designed to truly inform.
This raises an important question, though. Where is all of this supposed to happen?
Good point.
We're talking about building civic literacy, reclaiming historical vocabulary, and debating the meaning of justice. But in a highly restricted political environment, those conversations certainly aren't happening in the official halls of government or on state-run television.
Definitely not.
So where is this massive societal shift actually taking place?
The answer to that question forms the ultimate conclusion of the analysis. The most consequential transformations for Iran's future are not happening within the state apparatus.
How are they?
They are happening in civil society. And we should really define what we mean by civil society in this context.
It's broader than people think.
Much broader. We are talking about the networks, the professional associations, the cultural institutions, the informal community groups, and the underground intellectual circles where citizens organize their collective life entirely independent of the government's structures.
Throughout Iran's modern history, from the early 1900s through today, these independent spaces have been the primary incubators for intellectual debate and social organization.
They've always been there.
They have. Even when they face significant restrictions, crackdowns, and censorship, they persist. Their persistence is a defining, enduring feature of Iranian society.
The text has a great way of framing this.
It does. The analysis uses a brilliant phrase to describe this space. It calls civil society a laboratory of civic possibility.
I love that phrase.
It's perfect. It is within this laboratory that new ideas about belonging, citizenship, and governance are quietly tested, debated, refined, and gradually take root in the cultural consciousness.
So what does this all mean?
Let's bring it home.
If we zoom out and look at the entire landscape Vafa Mostahim has mapped out for us today, the ultimate takeaway is a rejection of the quick fix.
Completely.
The future of Iran isn't going to be determined by a simple equation of replacing one political structure with another or swapping out one set of leaders for a new charismatic figure. That is a simplified narrative that fundamentally ignores the historical reality of how deeply traumatized societies actually heal and evolve.
Durable political orders rarely emerge solely from the top down. They don't just spring from the sudden decisions of rulers or the signing of a new document.
They have to grow organically.
They arise slowly and methodically from the evolving, complex relationship between citizens, ideas, and institutions. It requires a rigorous recovery of that lost civic vocabulary. And it requires widespread public dialogue to build the literacy needed for responsible modern citizenship.
It's a massive undertaking.
It is. And what we must understand is that this process, the reconstruction of a nation's civic imagination, happens slowly. It happens entirely out of sight of the daily sensational political headlines. You aren't going to see the rebuilding of civic trust on the evening news.
It's too quiet for the news.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the slow renewal of that fundamental civic relationship is the most vital, indispensable foundation for any future political order in Iran to actually survive.
It is a profound, incredibly grounded way to look at the mechanics of a nation struggling to rebuild itself from the inside out.
It really reframes everything.
It does. And as we wrap up our deep dive today, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder. We have spent this time exploring how an entire nation, in the midst of profound geopolitical crisis and human tragedy, is realizing that it must rebuild its civic vocabulary from the ground up just to have a viable future.
I would encourage you to turn that analytical lens inward. Look at the communities, the workplaces, the local organizations, or the broader societies that you belong to.
Yeah.
Consider the invisible structural foundations holding them together right now.
If a massive crisis hit your community tomorrow, how strong is your own shared civic vocabulary?
That's the real test.
When the pressure is on, do the people around you actually agree on what justice, responsibility, and collective duty mean?
A lot of places would fail that test.
They would. And if push came to shove, would your local institutions be able to rely on genuine, hard-earned trust to weather the storm? Or would everyone immediately abandon the process and start looking around for a single charismatic savior to magically fix everything? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Iran 1400 Project podcast. The Iran 1400 Project invites scholars, experts, and intellectuals to share their assessment of the evolution of institutions and ideas during the past 100 years to inspire a vision of Iran in the 1400s. If you found today's episode thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. For more content and upcoming events, visit Iran1400.org. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful.